All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast, and my name is Jay Brown. And if this is your first time to the show, it's important for you to know that you have stumbled upon a most unusual episode. Longtime listeners, you know I have a usual routine, and I almost always stick to it. And today, I'm departing in two different ways. This is the second time in the more than 8 years of the show that I'm putting out an episode that does not include a guest. It's just me talking to you. The only other time I ever did this was at the end of last year in December. It was over the holidays, and I did like a personal check-in on a bunch of stuff that had been going on with me, and I updated folks on some personal stuff. But today, not only am I putting out an episode that doesn't include a guest, but it's very unplanned. It's very spur of the moment. This is the first time I've ever called an audible. And I'm not really much of a sports guy. I've never followed football at any time in my life. And if you're not familiar with American football, let me explain. Usually when a football team is on the field and is going to execute the next play, it gets called in from the coaches. Everybody's practiced the plays, everybody knows the plays, and the call comes in from the coaches. But sometimes when the quarterback steps up the line to run the play, he sees something on the field and he calls an audible, which means on the fly, in the spur of the moment, he changes the plan. And that's what's happening here today, which I have never done before. Even at the end of last year when I put out that episode, I planned to do that. Today, I've decided to just completely go off script. I haven't talked to my producer about this at all. He doesn't know I'm doing this. And please understand, I have episodes in the can that I can bring to you. In fact, I was hyping one last week. If you recall, if you were here at the end in the outro, I was hyping an episode that I was going to bring to you this week. And I mentioned that my producer told me I'm not supposed to do that. And this is a perfect example. Why? Because I've decided to change the plan last minute for a couple of different reasons. One, I had a number of episodes that were planned to be recorded that were, how should I say, a lighter fare. So they didn't require as much brain energy. Like I've got some episodes in the can that I think are epic, that are advanced continuing education for yoga teachers and practitioners. I mean, important episodes that you'll want to listen to more than once and maybe even take notes, like those kind of episodes. I have those in the can and I was planning to bring them to you, but all these things converged. First of all, I'm not at home. I'm with my in-laws in Virginia. And randomly, I did something that I never do, which is I forgot this one bag that I was supposed to bring that had all of my recording equipment stuff in there. So I don't have my usual equipment. I've makeshifted some stuff together to make this happen. So everything's completely off of its normal rocker. And, I went to listen to the episode that I was planning to put out this week, this epic episode, and it's incredible. But I'm on this family trip away. We have this 1 week a year that we come visit my in-laws. We do it at the end of the summer when we get back. School's going to be starting again within a week, It's like the end of the summer, and we always do this trip to my in-laws. And I was here and I was kind of having this relaxed time, and then I went to listen to the episode, and it was just requiring a lot of brain energy, in a good way, but still more brain energy than I wanted to expend right now because I'm having this relaxing time. And I thought to myself, you know what? Well, this is probably true for listeners also, at least the regular listeners, people who follow along with the new episodes that come out each week. It's summer for you too. And maybe you don't want to have to expend a whole bunch of brain power on the podcast right now. Maybe next week or the following week will be better for us to like get into some more in-depth study. I had these other episodes planned that I mentioned that had to be rescheduled, and I had intended for those to be like a palate cleanser, but that didn't happen. So I was like, all right, well, we'll just roll through it and we'll put out the ones we have. But like I said, everything sort of was coming together and making me feel like, ooh, I want to wait on this one. This doesn't feel like the right week for this episode. And then what sealed the deal was that I felt like I had something that maybe I wanted to talk about. As I mentioned at the end of last year, it was like a personal check-in. But today I feel like I have something that's on my mind, something that I've been trying to write about. And I thought that I would use this as an opportunity to work through some of those ideas. So basically, what happened was earlier today, I got an email from someone. Shout out to you, Robin. I think she listens to the show. And Robin is a yoga teacher who was teaching in yoga centers before the pandemic hit and hasn't taught like in-person classes at centers since. And one of the spaces that was a yoga center that she taught at before the pandemic that closed down during the pandemic has reopened with a new owner. And that new owner is looking for yoga teachers and is talking to her about starting a class there. And she reached out to me because we've just had email exchanges and she asks me about stuff from time to time, which I'm very happy to share thoughts about. And she was asking me like how much she should ask to be paid. Like what should the pay scale for yoga teachers be right now? And it had just so happened that when that email came in, I was at my computer writing about what it would be to open a yoga center right now. And I was thinking about it. I was thinking about what the economics of yoga centers was back when I had my yoga center for 10 years in Brooklyn, and how I was feeling about the yoga center model in those years after I let go of the center and I was traveling all around. Longtime listeners know I talked about it on the show. You can go back and listen to the episodes where I talked about this over the years, the way that the yoga center's business model was unsustainable, and when then we explored what would be different models. And ultimately I came to some very cynical conclusions about that. And I haven't really been thinking about it since. It's really been about like people, not spaces. Like who are your audience? Who are the people that want to work with you as a teacher? And then like the space doesn't matter whether you're in like a basement or like a church hall or whatever. Like having a yoga center didn't seem important anymore. But recently, I don't know, I've been thinking something different about it. And then I got this email from Robin. So all of this is to say that today's episode is very unusual. I want to talk a little bit about the economics of yoga centers, like where we were and where we are. And I want to like work through some ideas in my head about how we might do it now if we were going to. So if that's a topic that's interesting to you, then maybe you stick around. But as I said at the very beginning here, if you're new to the show, it's not the usual fare. And if you're not interested so much in the economics of yoga centers, then maybe you want to go back to the archives or come back again next week. But if you're interested and you're going to stick around, I thought we might get into it a little bit today. And I suppose to start, I would look back to how yoga centers were being run prior to the pandemic, maybe even like up until 2017. That's my personal reference point. I had a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn from 2007 to 2017. And I watched the way that the business model evolved. So when I started, I had been teaching as an independent teacher in countless centers and wellness places and gyms for more than a decade before I opened my own yoga center. So I had seen how yoga centers were being run, like whether it was sort of more gym style or whether it was like the independent single room sole proprietor center, which was what all of them were for a long time in New York City in the early 90s when I was coming into yoga. And so I opened my yoga center determined to, run it in a way that was for the yoga, not for business, but really just to like honor what I wanted to do as a teacher and to create a place where people could grow into their own teaching practices. If you go back and listen to a recent episode I did with my old friend Conchetta, we talked about this, about how at one point in time in the 90s, yoga centers were really a place for people to grow and become teachers, and they had space to do that. And I wanted to create that place. So when I opened, there was no like online registration. We did accept credit cards, but it was all class cards, 5 class card, 10 class card, and 20 class card. And you would actually have a paper card in a little like file box with like numbers on it, like 5, 10, or 20. And then with each class, we would use a hole puncher and we would punch a hole to mark which class you'd use. And that was how we kept track of how many classes you had left. Boy, do I feel old right now. And I had a sign-in sheet for each class where each person signed their name, or I often would write the name in myself. And I would mark like whether it was a 5 class or 10 class card. So I had a paper sheet with a list of everybody's name for every class for at least the first 5 years of the center. At some point, we did start to do, it was like a monthly unlimited card where you would pay for 1 month of unlimited classes. And it was usually like, I don't know, it was pretty pricey, $120 a month or something. And it was really just for like the diehard practitioners. But the majority of classes that you sold were single drop-in classes or 5, 10, or 20 class cards. Probably 5 more than anything, 5 and 10, and every once in a while a 20, And when that was the model, it was much easier, at least for me, like a non-business minded guy, to keep track of the money coming in and to make sure that, like the center could be sustainable. So there was mainly 2 different pay scales that were being used for yoga teachers at that time, which is probably still true mostly for today. There was the like per student or like percentage of the proceeds pay scale. And then there was like a set fee pay scale. So most centers would do something like a $15 base rate and then $5 per student. And hopefully there'd be like no cap, like the more students came in, the more money both the center and the teacher made. And, it would work out like if you had, like, let's say if it's $15 a class on average and, you have 7 students in class, the teacher would make like $50. And that was kind of like standard there. But the good part of it was you only needed 1 student to come to essentially break even. So it didn't cost you anything to have the class. And the more people that came, the more both the teacher and the center made more money. Both were getting part of the profits that were coming in as more people came. And there was incentive. It was like a mutual incentive, a mutual financial incentive. And that's what I did at my center. I think, in fact, I think it eventually got up to a $20 base, but like it was a $15 base for a long time. And then I actually did something where I believe they got more, like $7 a student for the first 5 students. And then after that, it was $3 a student, but no cap. Like, I worked it so that if you only had 5 students or less, you were making a little bit less than most other places. But as soon as you had more than 5 students, you were making more than like all the other centers. And there was no cap to how much you could make. And that kind of pay scale worked really well when it was class cards, because you could tell, you knew how much you were making off each student for each class. And part of that was going to the teacher and part of that was going to the center. And it was a fair split and everybody was happy. And there wasn't pressure on you to like have to cram as many people in necessarily. Of course, that is contingent on your lease, which we will get to. We'll get to the lease aspect of it. But in terms of pay scales for teachers, it was on like a per student basis, and it worked really well. The other model that people used that sometimes happened was a set fee. And sometimes that was great because as a yoga teacher, you knew how much you were going to make. They paid you $40 a class. No matter how many people were there, you knew how much you were going to make off the class. And I think this really came about when people who were running yoga centers became more business minded, like smarter business people would prefer to have like set fees because you know exactly how much it costs you to pay all of your teachers. You have so many classes, a per class rate that you're paying the teachers, you know what the number is. And then whatever else more money you make, you get to keep. You see, that's kind of the issue with that model, with the set fee, is that if there's not enough students coming in to cover the set fee, if your set fee is $50 and only 2 people are coming, that class is costing the center money. And one thing I know for sure is if that's the case, if you're a teacher teaching at a center and not enough people are coming and that class is not making enough money to pay you your set fee, you can be sure that's not going to last. That's unsustainable. So you don't want that as a teacher, in my mind. You don't want to feel like your class is costing the center money. Of course, the reverse can be true. Like if enough people are coming, if the right amount of people are coming, let's say, so, you got 10 people in class, you've got a set fee of $50, the center's still making a good chunk, you're making what feels like a fair rate for your time, everybody's happy. Only until your class becomes very popular. So let's say your class becomes one of the most popular classes at the center and it's packed. It's selling out 25 or more. Maybe you're in one of those big centers, 40 people, let's say. I don't even know what size yoga centers are out there right now. But let's just say back in the day, my center maxed out. I would never put more than like 32 people in there. You could do like a mat to mat 40, but let's just say 30. Okay. Let's say 30 people. Your class is selling out at 30 people. And you're only getting your $50 set fee. And your class is completely fueling the center, you're the big popular teacher at the center. At a certain point, that starts to not feel so fair anymore. So that happened at a lot of centers I saw. That happened where people had set fees and then at a certain point their class took off and then they were doing the math themselves and then they felt like it wasn't right or it wasn't fair, that the teachers were being exploited. Of course, the center provides all the resources. So those were the 2, models that we were working with. Now, here's the thing. The aspect of yoga center business that threw everything, in my mind, out of whack, whether it was the set fee or the per student pay scales, was unlimited memberships. That was it. Once we moved from like monthly unlimited cards to recurring monthly memberships, everything changed. Because for those of us who were doing the per student pay scale with our teachers, it created a terrible situation because if you had people become members to your center, recurring memberships, monthly memberships, and they weren't coming a lot, it was good for the center because they didn't have to pay the teachers as much. You see? So if people have memberships and they don't use the memberships, it's good for the center in some weird, perverse way, like financially. But if you have members who do use it, who come every day to like multiple classes, you're screwed because it's really good for the teachers. All the teachers are getting paid more, but the center starts to lose money. And you're just hoping that you're going to have enough memberships to sustain the classes. And once that happened, once everybody started using MindBody Online, is anybody still using MindBody Online? I don't know. But once people switched over to online registration for classes and monthly recurring memberships, it threw it all off. You no longer could like have it be easy to see how much money was coming in for this class. It separated like the income from individual classes, and it made it just like, center-wide revenue. And then, I don't know, it just, for me, that was the turning point that I saw happen. And I never even did recurring monthly memberships. I did monthly unlimited cards, but I did not do recurring memberships at the center the entire 10 years that I did it. But at the last 3 years, every other yoga center had switched over. And I've talked about this before, but I did sell my center, which is a whole other story that we'll leave for another time. But in the process of people wanting to buy this center off of me, which was so crazy because I don't even know what they were buying, but I would be in these meetings with people. And a lot of times these were people who were not yoga teachers who just wanted to like own a wellness business and were like into yoga or had been to yoga classes at their gym. And they're like, ooh, they have money and they're entrepreneurs. And they're like, saw that this yoga center was for sale. And they're like, ooh, I would like to own a yoga center. So I'd be in this meeting with them. And they would almost always ask me the same question. They would say, how many memberships do you have? And I would have to say, none. I don't believe in them. And the looks on their face, and it was like, oh, like the palm on the face and the palm of the broker, and it just, there was this moment where that shift to recurring memberships really changed everything. And ultimately what the centers were all surviving on was teacher training, which I've talked about on the show also, and maybe is another podcast also. But that's where things were when I let go of my center in 2017. And then I just remember for those couple of years, 2018 and 2019, I was traveling all around, putting out podcasts, go back and listen to the intros. And basically I had come to a place where I felt like the yoga center model had completely collapsed, even before the pandemic, that numbers were crashing for people's teacher trainings and attendance was down at a lot of centers. And I felt like it was because of these business models that had come about, these recurring memberships, and the set fees for teachers were like $25 a class. It was just, everybody was getting exploited. Yoga teachers were trying to organize into unions. If you recall, in New York City, you had these corporate models. You had YogaWorks and Core Power had kind of created these like empires that were, taking over all the market share. And I was like, screw this. This doesn't even work anymore. And the centers, none of them are doing well. None of them seem to me to be thriving or doing all that well. And then I was doing like the international travel circuit, and, all the centers were like hosting these like international teachers. And that was cool. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was a golden time there where you could have all these amazing teachers come swinging through your town at your local center. And I just don't know that that's happening now the way that it was then. Of course, there was also ongoing debates around that because you have local yoga teachers there, right? And then these like big celeb teachers come swinging into town, and like everybody goes to their workshops and then doesn't go to the like local workshops for the local teachers. So it's like the celeb teachers would sort of be stealing the fire of the local teachers. In any case, you had all of that happening. And what I observed, having done it for a couple of years in a row, that at a certain point, it wasn't very sustainable, because if you went back to a yoga center every year, to some degree, you would inevitably see like decreasing numbers each year. That people would have been to your workshops there. There's only so many people who the center brings in. There's only so many people you might bring in. And so you would have like a big first year, maybe a pretty good second year, but you'd always see this like third year slump. And smart people, I remember Leslie was on the show and he was talking about how they would take a year off. They had worked it out. What was her name? Ava Taylor, the talent agent for the yoga teachers, figured out that it's probably not a good idea to go every year, that to take a year off, go every other year to a center, you know? But I could see that wasn't very sustainable. And I started to realize, oh, hey, I could probably put together my own events. I can find a space wherever. I could go on Airbnb and get like a little house or like an apartment with a big enough living room that I could move the coffee table aside and have room for like 7-8 mats. And I could just have 7-8 people come do a weekend with me at that space. And I keep all the money, and I would make more money than if I had been hosted at a place and we had 30-40 people. So that's what I was doing right before the pandemic. If you remember, I had launched this tour. I was doing my own tour that I had organized for myself. And the premise of it was that the yoga centers were done, that it doesn't matter about the space anymore. Like getting a long-term lease or spending millions of dollars on like a build out for a space just seemed like the most ludicrous thing to do to me, that it was really not about the space anymore. And I think that's probably true to some degree. I know that I was talking about this with Andrew Tanner recently, if you want to go back and listen to that. And he was saying the same thing, that the space doesn't matter anymore. And I had thought that was true up until this morning when I got that email from Robin. It really got me thinking that maybe something has changed. You see, building like a online platform or wanting to have like an online reach, like I have this show which has like an audience. It's not a big audience. Honestly, it's probably about 4,000 people, 4,000 of you out there who listen every week. There's more than that, I think, who listen to the show on the whole, but like regular diehard listeners, you know? And as far as podcasts go, that's actually not bad. It's pretty good considering the whole of podcasts out there. But in terms of like international or global internet reach, it's like nothing. And, you know, the things that I might do to try and grow the show, to like make the show bigger or to try to make more money off of the show, it's all the same shit that I didn't want to do when I had the yoga center in terms of marketing, really, you know, or trying to like reach new audiences. It involves marketing and messaging and advertising and things like that. And I'm not feeling motivated to do that at all. It doesn't feel like a useful way to expend my energies. And I've just been really feeling like maybe the time has come for spaces again, that maybe there's an important role for a yoga center, for a space that's dedicated to practice, that exists in a community, in a neighborhood where people can go to it. Like a place you go that's not your house. like, dare I say, church, like a house of worship or a house of community-based breathing and moving. I've been really reflecting back on that first 5 years I had the center when it was good and how rewarding that was. Not just for me and the teachers, but I think for the people who came. And some of you might remember not too long ago, I might have talked about this. I have this space. I had a space in Allentown when I first moved to Pennsylvania for a few years that I was really hoping to try to get kind of going with local classes, but it was in a neighborhood that wasn't the right neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that had really cheap rent, but the people in the neighborhood were not people who I think were interested in the yoga practice I was doing. I don't think it was the right place. And I kept that space until the pandemic, and then I downsized and I took a space share with a photographer. And it was way better for me. It's right around the corner from my house. The photographer's in the space 2 days a week, and then I have it the rest of the week, essentially. It's very cheap. She's not charging me a lot of rent. And the deal is it's small. It's like a apartment. So it's like a living room, essentially. And I could put, maybe max 5 to 8 people. Maximum, And I recently, at the beginning of this year, I decided the time had come for me to really reach out to the neighborhood, try to get some in-person people into these classes. I freaked out just zooming out and seeing myself in a room with my laptop teaching to the screen for years now. And I'm like, I need real people. This is not what I do only. And so I put out a A-frame sign. I made an A-frame sign that said, here are yoga classes. And I sent out some emails via the Neighborhood Association newsletter. And within 2 days, I had people start walking in that I'd never met before, just walked by and saw the sign, just like the old days, just like when I opened in Brooklyn. And I was super excited. And then, well, what happened is the person I rent from, her husband, whose name is on the lease, he saw that I put the sign out and that I sent the email, and he freaked out because the space is zoned as a residential property. And when they first got the space and she started doing her photography stuff out of there, they had signage, and like some code inspector came by and told him that he wasn't allowed to run a business out of there. There's all these like hoops he would have to jump through. And so they took all the signage down, and then they've just been doing it on the down low since. And so he freaked out because he thought that I was going to call attention that there's a business being run in there and that they were going to it was going to screw things up. He was ready to kick me out, and I had to make nice and basically remove the signs and just hope and pray that no code inspectors, which they didn't come. It was fine. But basically I can't use the space that I'm in the way that I want to. And so I've been fantasizing about the possibility of another space. And I found one, but I don't really know if it's doable. There's not really a lot of possibilities, but I was thinking that probably you would think that commercial real estate right now might have a lot of possibilities to it, In any case, I don't really know what the possibility. I don't have any money right now. I have no money to open a yoga center. So it'll need to be some very special situation, which we could talk about. It's good. The leases are going to need to be leases that can support centers. But the main thing I was thinking about is, well, if I were to try to do that, just for the heck's sake, not that I'm really thinking I'm going to do it, but if I just imagine what it would be like to open a yoga center right now, how would I do it? What would I do differently now compared to what I did before? So off the bat, it's all about the lease. As I said before, the lease situation is everything, because what happened in Brooklyn for me was that the first 5 years, the rent that I signed on to was commensurate with the amount of money that I was able to make with the yoga center. So it was great. Enough money was coming in to pay the rent, to pay the teachers, to pay me, and it was great. But if you know anything about New York real estate, it doesn't stay that way. First of all, they built in increases each year. So it would be like a 3% increase each year built in. And I was able to keep pace. The center grew all those years. More money was coming in that could meet those 3% increases. But at 5 years, when you have to do the lease renewal, and I did another 5-year lease, there was a huge jump. I don't remember what exact numbers at this point. It's been too far in the memory, but it was a big jump up. And then the 3% increases from there. And, I barely kept pace for the first 2 years of that second lease because I did a bunch of things business-wise that I thought were smart things that helped make more money, teacher training stuff and other stuff. And then that last 3 years, though, like I said, that I remember if I look back at the spreadsheets, you can just see it. It's just like tipped over a cliff where the rent was just too high. And with just like the uncertainty and volatility of our current moment, I don't see how I could right now sign a long-term lease. Not unless I had more buy-in. Not unless I already had too many people showing up to my classes in the neighborhood. Like, there was already clear demand, or some way to know whether or not it would make sense that there's going to be enough people to show up and enough money to come in. And so I think that if I were to do it now, it would have to be a very special situation where like I can talk to the landlord and we can come to some kind of agreement. And this one space in my neighborhood's been empty for the entire 7 years that I've been here. Nothing's ever been in there. So there's a chance that if you can find a commercial space that's just been empty for a long time and a landlord who's an actual human being, because that's what's going to require, it's got to have to be somebody who's going to be a human being and not just the landlord. Because if I could convince that person, like let's say I could convince that person to let me have this space on a month-to-month basis for like super low rent, like what I'm paying now at this other shared space for like a year to see if we can make it go. And then we negotiate something, or like it has to be like a mutual buy-in situation. Of course, this is only true if we're talking about like a sole proprietor, teacher-owned yoga center. Like we're talking about my situation. If you're somebody who has like more resources or like somebody who's backing you, like I had Jenny Wilkinson on not too long ago, and she had that person who had all the money that was backing the place. If you've got investments or investors or people footing the bill, then they're going to want returns. And I still think that we don't need to like dump massive amounts of money into building out spaces into luxurious spa environments. Like, I don't think that the people who would be coming to the center that I would open in my neighborhood are coming for a spa. They're just coming because they've got pain and anxiety. And if they go to this place for an hour and do this breathing and moving, it seems eased. And there's nice people there. And that's the model that was at work when I first started going to yoga classes. That's what's happening here. I'm going back in my mind to when I first went to classes. And that's what it was like. You just had really sincere practitioners open up these like storefronts and then just start teaching yoga classes there. And, communities formed around that. And I guess that's what I've been wanting to kind of see if it would be possible to foster something like that again. Of course, it's going to take very specific circumstances. Again, the lease situation is everything. And then I guess if you do get the lease, how are we going to run it? Are we going to do the per student rate, or are we going to do the set fee rate? The other model that we talked about on the show years ago, if you remember, was the cooperative model, where you do something like, figure out like how many class slots there are, what the monthly rent is, and then you come up with like a per class amount that the teacher pays to the center for the slot, and then they keep all the money that comes in. So the center is there just to needs to support itself, and you built a system where the classes that happen support the center, but the teachers get to make all the money that comes in for them. And honestly, that would work okay for me. That would be great for me if I could have a couple other teachers who also taught some classes, and we were able to pay for the space, and then I only made money off of my own classes and maybe had the space to do some other stuff like podcast stuff or whatever else I do. That would work great for me, but it does require, people you can collaborate with. Like all the other attempts I've heard at people trying to do cooperative models fail at one point or another. And it always comes down to communication and everybody pulling their own weight. The level of communication and collaboration you need to have a cooperative center is exceedingly rare. So it's not an easy thing to do. And we also talked about the benevolent dictator, where you got the one person whose name's on the lease, but then they're just very benevolent about how they do it, and they're fair, which sometimes is often the best model, but it is contingent on that one person being benevolent. I guess it would really just depend, I'd have to see if I could even get a space like that. I don't know. But that's really what it comes down to. If you could get a space for cheap enough, and you live in a neighborhood with people who might be interested and have $10 to $15 or whatever for a yoga class once a week, then you might be able to make something fly. I guess I personally want a yoga center in a way that I haven't in a very long time. And I guess I'm wondering if anybody else out there is feeling like that too. And you know what? Oh my God, I don't even know how long I've been going here. I can hear my family just came back. My wife, and my daughters, and my sister-in-law, they were all out doing a summer activity, and I was up here staying home and recording this, and they've come back, I heard, and they're going to come banging in this door any moment, potentially. So I probably should wrap this up. And I don't even know if I'm going to use this, honestly. I'm going to listen back, and I'm going to decide whether I think this warrants putting it out or not. If you're hearing this, and I do decide to do that, I would appreciate knowing if you got anything from it, or if it was interesting, or if it was a waste of time. Like I said, I went completely off script today, tried to do something different, and I don't know if anybody cares about any of this. This is just what I was thinking about today, and thought that there might be others who might also find something in it. I will say I am doing my best to get out there a little bit, even for those of you who are listeners. I would love to meet you. If you're listening to this the week that it comes out, I do have upcoming live events, just 1 or 2 scheduled for the rest of this year so far, in Manchester, England, and in Dublin, Ireland. So if you're listening to this within a month of its publication, you go to the website and find out about those. But really, I guess I just wanted to put out there these thoughts on how yoga centers are running. If you're listening to this and you're a yoga center owner, I'm curious to hear from you about how you're doing things and how things are going. If you're a teacher and you're teaching at centers, I know I've put out this call before, but I'm putting it out again. I'm curious if people are opening yoga centers, if they're working. I know I did an event recently, and the yoga center survived the pandemic, but it was my gut feeling. She didn't really go into details, but I think that they've managed to survive by taking on a lot of debt. And I wonder how many of the centers that have survived, that are surviving, are taking on a lot of debt. We don't like to talk about that. I didn't. I had certainly taken on a lot of debt with my center. And you can do it. You can run on debt for a while. But I guess I'm wondering what's going on out there. What kind of leases are people getting? Are there some centers out there that are thriving? How are you paying your teachers? I don't know. I'm curious about this. So if you're listening to all this all the way through to the end, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Go to jbrownyoga.com and send me a note. If there's yoga center owners or people you think I would talk to and bring them on the show, we can share it with everybody. I'm happy to do that as well. All right, so I guess that's it. That's me working through some thoughts on the economics of yoga centers and whether or not they're viable. I certainly think that they're needed on like a soul level. I feel like as much as I appreciate all the online stuff that I do and the people I'm able to connect with there, I don't know, we got to hold the line and try to have yoga still exist in an analog frame as well. All right, I don't even know how to end this one. It's so off the off the rails. Like I said, I hope it's been of any interest to you. Do reach out and let me know. Either way, if you thought this was a waste of your time, you can let me know that too. More than anything, I am hoping that you're having a good summer if you're listening to this when it comes out. I wanted to give us a little palate cleanser here on going deep into yoga philosophy, because like I said, I've got some real deep stuff to share with you coming up in either next week or the following, but I hope that there's something for you in this today. And I hope that people are doing okay. I hope that you're hanging in there. You're having a good summer. All right, that's it. What do you say we keep our wits about us? And at the very least, let's be kind. Let's be kind to ourselves. Let's be kind to others. And I will talk to you again soon. Please take care. Cheers.